Ever get that feeling like you're kind of just skimming the surface of things?
Mm-hmm.
Like we're looking at a postcard instead of the real deal, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean.
That's what we're diving into today with Pedro Elias
Oh, interesting.
and his book, Spiritual Reflections for a New World.
Okay.
He's got this, well, I think it's intriguing anyway, this idea about how we see the world,
Right.
that it's more like a two-dimensional painting than the whole 3D experience we usually assume it is.
It is a powerful metaphor, yeah.
Right.
He's not saying the world eye is flat, obviously.
Of course, of course.
It's more about how our minds kind of simplify things for us, you know?
Oh, for sure, for sure.
We're taking in so much information all the time, and our brains, they create these shortcuts to deal with it all.
Makes sense, makes sense. Like that example he uses with the landscape painting.
Right.
You can see the depth, the perspective,
Yeah.
even though it's all on this flat canvas.
Mm-hmm.
Elias is arguing that we're kind of doing the same thing with the real world, the actual world around us.
And that works great for, well, just getting by day to day, you know, but
Yeah.
it can also make us a little, I guess, asleep
Hmm.
to how much is really out there.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Like we're stuck on observe instead of really connecting.
So instead of like really experiencing the vibrancy of a forest, we're just seeing, I don't know, a bunch of trees.
Right.
Like those green blobs kids draw.
Exactly.
That's a weird thought when you really think about it.
It is, isn't it?
So if we're stuck in this flat world perception, what's the way out? I'm guessing Elias has some thoughts on that.
He does. He talks about contemplation.
Okay, contemplation.
And it's not about checking out or ignoring reality. It's more about, well, experiencing this life force, this energy that he believes is in everything around us.
Okay, so not just seeing, but really perceiving.
You got it.
All right, now you've got me interested, but what does that actually look like in practice? You know, how do we move from observation to this deeper contemplation?
Well, he uses this phrase, let me see if I can get it right. In contemplation, we perceive the three-dimensional space no longer through the mind.
So we're moving beyond thinking so much.
Exactly. It's about quieting that mental chatter, less analyzing and labeling.
So instead of getting lost in my thoughts about what I'm looking at, I'm just being fully present with it.
You've got it.
Okay. I think I'm starting to get a feel for this. So where does this empty space come into play?
Yes. Elias says recognizing the importance of empty space is really key to accessing this state of contemplation.
Hold on. Empty space. Didn't we start out talking about the world being full of, vibrancy and life?
I know, it sounds a bit strange, right?
Yeah.
But he's not talking about emptiness in a literal way, like there's nothing there.
Okay, so what kind of empty space are we talking about?
Think of it like this. It's when we start to recognize the space between objects, the space that isn't filled with things, that we can actually start to see the world in its three-dimensionality.
So I'm trying to wrap my head around this. You're saying that by focusing on the empty space, we can actually perceive the world more fully.
Yes. It's kind of a paradox, isn't it? Because when we only focus on the objects themselves, their physical forms, we kind of reduce them down to their simplest, flattest representations. It's only when we recognize the space around them that we can grasp their true depth.
So it's like in a sculpture. You can't have the shape without the empty space around it, right? The void gives it form.
That's a great way to put it.
It's like that yin and yang symbol, opposites working together.
Exactly. And for Elias, that's a big part of what it means to truly contemplate, to see the world in its wholeness, its interconnectedness, not just a bunch of separate, isolated things.
This is really resonating with me, but I'm curious, how do we actually make that shift? How do we go from analyzing everything to experiencing it in this more whole way, this contemplative way? So how do we actually, I don't know, train our minds to do this contemplation thing?
Yeah. It's definitely not as easy as just looking at something, is it?
It doesn't sound as simple as that, no. It almost seems more, I don't know, challenging. Like, how do we actually make that shift?
Elias talks a lot about silencing the mind, which,
let's face it,
it's not exactly easy in this day and age, is it?
it's like trying to meditate at a rock concert. My mind, it just wants to go,
And that's totally normal. The idea isn't to beat ourselves up for having thoughts.
Right, right.
It's more about gently, redirecting our attention,
Okay.
bringing it back to the present, over and over, to just being.
Just being, okay.
He actually compares it to those, what are they called, stereograms?
Oh, those things that look like just a jumble of dots.
Yes.
And then you stare, and suddenly, bam!
A 3D image pops out.
I was never very good at those, I'll be honest.
Well, contemplation can be like that. It's not always straightforward.
Yeah.
There's no magic formula. But as we practice, focusing our attention, letting those thoughts quiet down,
Hmm.
those moments of clarity,
Yeah.
they just start to happen more naturally.
So it's not about forcing it, but setting the stage. Like a gardener.
I like
You
that.
prepare the soil, make sure it's all right for the seed to sprout. You can't force it to grow, right?
Beautiful analogy.
Yeah.
And like that gardener tending their plants, Elias believes we can all cultivate this deeper experience of reality
Yeah.
if we're willing to put in the effort and show up with an open mind.
Okay, so we're planting the seeds, quieting the mind, waiting for things to click. What happens when they do? What can we expect, according to Elias?
He describes it vividly, like the world becomes a hologram.
Wow, okay, that's an upgrade. But what does that even mean? Like visually, or is it more of an internal shift?
It seems to be both, actually.
Oh.
He talks about colors being more intense, sounds richer, even the air feeling alive.
Wow.
But it's more than just, what we perceive with our senses. It's this profound inner shift, too, this feeling of peace, a lightness, and being so connected to everything around us.
So as our perception of the world expands, our sense of self does too. Like we're part of something way bigger, more mysterious.
Yes, and this is where things get really interesting, because Elias doesn't shy away from the, I guess you could say, more mystical side of this. He
Ooh.
talks about a fire that ignites within us when we start to see the world this way, through contemplation.
Fire. Now I'm really curious. Is he being literal? Or is this a metaphorical fire?
It's definitely metaphorical,
Right.
but it's meant to evoke a powerful transformation.
Okay.
He calls it a fire of pure love.
Fire of pure love. Okay, now that's a new one. Tell me more.
It's not romantic love like we usually think of it. It's way bigger. It's about this deep, unconditional love for everything,
Yeah.
for all of creation.
That's quite an image. But it also feels, I don't know, a bit elusive. How do we even know if we're experiencing this fire of pure love and not just like having a nice daydream? So how do we know if we're really tapping into this fire of pure love? Like not just, getting lost in a fantasy.
I think that's a question we all grapple with. And it gets right to the heart of what Elias is trying to say. It's not about, putting a label on things,
Yeah.
checking boxes, trying to force some kind of big spiritual moment. It's about those subtle shifts that happen inside us as we practice this contemplation thing.
So maybe it's more about the journey than the destination. Like those little moments when we feel that connection, that sense of awe. Maybe those are like the embers of that fire he talks about.
I think you're right on. And it's about fanning those embers, nurturing that connection, letting that fire grow.
I like that.
Remember how Elias talked about the importance of empty space and how we see the world?
Yeah.
He's saying that creating that same space within ourselves,
Okay.
a space where there's no judgment, no mental chatter, that's what lets this fire of pure love really take hold.
So the outer space mirrors the inner space.
Exactly. The more we appreciate that stillness, that emptiness between things, the more we create that same spaciousness within ourselves. And that can be really transformative.
I can see that.
And what I find so interesting is that Elias doesn't see this as some special practice,
Yeah.
It's not just for monks or mystics. It's something we can all do in our everyday lives.
Even amidst all the chaos, like trying to navigate the grocery store on a Saturday afternoon or rush hour traffic, I don't know, it feels a little ambitious.
It might sound like a tall order, but Elias would say that's exactly when it's most important. When our minds are going a mile a minute and we're feeling disconnected, that's when we need this practice the most. In fact, he says, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, contemplation isn't about escaping the world. It's about diving deeper into it. It's about finding the sacred in the ordinary.
I love that. So it's about finding that sense of wonder, even in the mundane, everyday stuff.
You got it. And that's the beauty of it, isn't it? It's always available to us. We don't need any special equipment or a meditation retreat. We can practice it anytime, anywhere.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you hope listeners take away from Elias and this idea of contemplation?
That the world is full of wonder and beauty, more than we often realize. But to really experience it, we have to slow down, quiet the mind, and look at the world with fresh eyes.
French eyes.
And as we do that, as we cultivate this contemplative awareness, we start to see those sparks of pure love everywhere.
Illuminating even the most ordinary moments. That's a beautiful thought to end on. So to everyone listening, as you go about your day, see if you can bring a little more of that awareness into your interactions, into your surroundings. Pay attention to the little things, to the spaces between things, and approach it all with a sense of curiosity and wonder. You never know what you might discover. Until next time, deep divers.